computers may have just moved themselves a little bit closer to being human. In the first round of the Chess.com Computer Chess Championship, LCO, more commonly known to the global chess community as Leela, faced off against chess engine Chiron, and this is what happened in that game in our chess community spotlight. We started out with e4 and e5, and after a couple of very well-known moves, we get a Ruy Lopez or Spanish game. So apparently, as our understanding of chess is evolving, those playing the best chess in the universe still prefer an opening we've been playing for a long time too, and maybe that's comforting. But after the move knight to d4, it was clear that Chiron wanted to test LCO's knowledge of a sideline opening, maybe trying to take it out of its self-taught opening theory. At this point, Leela, having played millions of games, this self-taught mechanism where the neural neurons, I don't even know, are teaching LCO exactly what to do. Perhaps there are a few holes, maybe that's what Chiron's thinking, to test in a sideline. But after knight takes d4 and castles, we saw that Leela was not to be surprised. This is, of course, the most clear and theoretically well-known way for white to play. And after bishop to c5, we see Leela find the most principled move, bishop back to c4. Now, once the Spanish development of the bishop is no longer serving a purpose, and that you're not putting pressure on the knight, which of course indirectly increases your pressure on the e5 pawn if you're white, again in a more traditional Spanish, this move makes the most sense. You bring the bishop back from a now useless square to a diagonal that is the most effective one, especially when white's natural plan of d3, followed by expanding on the king's side, is coming. Now, whenever your opponent has a very easy time gaining space on one particular side of the board, meaning the structure is just making the advancement over there easy peasy, there are two ways you can challenge that. One is aggressive counterplay on the other side of the board. So your opponent has a space advantage and perhaps a little bit of a leg up on the race on one side, you attack on the other. The other way is to try to change the pawn structure. We're going to see that Chiron, maybe not thinking exactly in the human intuitive terms I just described, but thinking in his own way, tried to do exactly those things against Leela in this game. He starts out with the move a5, aggressively looking for counterplay on the other side of the board. If Leela wasn't prepared to deal with this, there may even be tricks like c6, b5, and then a4, trapping the light squared priest, right? But of course, Leela is aware that this might be coming, and she puts the kibosh on that with a4. To highlight real quick, I did some analysis, actually did a lot of analysis. You can check it out at my blog, which I'll feature for you here at the end of this video. The main line theory is not a5. The best human players in this position have normally played knight e7, trying to develop rapidly on the king side so that black might be best prepared to meet the attack. But one more recent game shows a little bit of what white can get in these types of positions. After queen h5, Rekarovka, and then bishop to g5, you see immediate pressure coming to the king side, and already black kind of afraid of what might be more to come, right? In this game between Hari Krishna and Dambacher, we saw that Hari achieved a very, very strong initiative after bringing the battery to the h4 d8 diagonal, and then eventually expanding naturally on the king side. Moves like h4 followed, and here we see a natural way for white's attack to develop when you have such a big space advantage and such a solid structure. Now, highlighting this game is not just for those who want to be knight d4 sideline Ruy Lopez experts, but after the move in the game that Leela played, a4, we see why Chiron played this move h6, to prevent the bishop from coming to g5, with his intention being, of course, to develop this knight to either e7 or f6. This move makes a lot of sense when we consider how Hari Krishna may have crushed his opponent Dambacher with the bishop g5 development. So that analysis and research there that I did hopefully helps you understand why Chiron maybe wasted a couple moves, and so we're not confused by that. After the move knight d2, knight f6, we see there is no bishop g5, but Leela is still intending aggressive things. The move f4 comes, and when I first saw this, I was a little bit taken aback, thinking, okay, is that really something that a human would be willing to laugh in the face of danger about? Or is that just Leela thinking, this isn't that big of a deal with the knight coming to the dark squares? Accurate calculations showed us that LCO was indeed correct to accelerate the attack, since a move like knight g4 could be met by knight to b3, where moves like knight e3 would actually allow bishop takes, trade on c5, and then queen h5, with a whole lot of double attacks, followed probably by a move like rook to e1. But if the bishop retreats itself instead of hopping into e3, now on h3, we see that white has plenty of time to get a big center. We don't need the knight takes c5, and double attack tricks to show that white is just much, much better here, and that this e3 pawn well, his days are numbered. So the idea here is to note, as we're trying to tell the story of a game, we want to appreciate genius when we see it, but learn something along the way. And we're trying to see that what is black trying to do in order to try to prevent white's pawn storm and pressure on the king side from getting out of control. First, you go for counterplay. We're wondering, were there some tactical ideas to punish Leela's aggressive expansion? And the answer is no. So black continues to play logical moves. But after h3 preventing knight g4 now, bishop to e6, we see Leela's first, I would call it, human understanding of what to do in these positions. This is not the type of attack that Hare Krishna got with the bishop on g5 and the queen on h5, where all the pieces were already on the king side. This is one that's going to take a little more time to marinate. And, excuse me, that was a mouse slip. And whenever you're trying to attack on a side of the board and you don't have all your pieces there right away, you really want to be careful not to change the structure or clarify your opponent's defense. For that reason, Leela plays the very nice move, bishop back to b3. This is the move that maintains the tension, right? And it also prevents black from doing the other thing I said that you would want to do when you're losing the pawn race. Moves like d5 are just not options in these positions because of things like e5 and f5, and the pawn storm is just rolling. So what did we say black wants to do in order to try to stop, or what was the advice that anyone would want to do in order to get counterplay or stop your opponent from having a very easy pawn storm expansion? Either get aggressive counterplay yourself and win the race, like a King's Indian type of game you might think of, or a Yugoslav attack, or try to change the game, change the race. Don't keep running in a race you're destined to lose, right? So try to change the pawn structure with things like d5. But again, that's not something that Leela allows. Bishop to b3, very patient. After c6, we see the queen building up to e1. Still, d5 is not going to be possible due to e5 and f5. So Chiron, he blinks first in this game of chicken. And after knight takes b3, bishop to b6, we see the next move that shows Leela's intentions to forever prevent black from changing the structure so that she will forever be in peace and build up her attack slowly on the king side. Queen to f2, very accurate move. Rather than being aggressive with queen g3 or queen h4 or even f5 right away, all decent moves to continue the attack. She plays queen f2 simply to threaten to win a pawn. Well, maybe she's a little materialistic, but the point is, if it forces black to play c5, now you're even less likely to ever see black be able to change the structure. On that note, the moment that she forces more pawns on the dark squares, immediate remaneuvers begin to hold down the light squares. And in fact, here we see a very, I would call almost a Magnus Carlsen maneuver, not being settled on any square for the piece, right? Really making sure that she gets this knight to the ideal square she wanted to begin with, which was on b5, and eventually closes up all counterplay. The rook comes to c6 to try to play c4, and she shakes her Dikembe Mutombo finger, not in my house, right? So what do we have now? After the move b3, we know that black is clearly worse. There's a lack of counterplay. Sorry about that. Keeps moving very quickly. There's a lack of counterplay. There's a clear space advantage for white. So the third thing you would try to do, and these are tips, even though we're looking at it from Chiron's perspective, where nobody's really happy, because you can already tell by the storyline of this game who's probably going to end up on top. But counterplay seems to have failed. The ability to change the structure seems to have failed. Now what you can do when you have less space, or you may be losing in the race, is try to trade pieces. One, if it's a kingside race and the queens come off the board, less likely you'll get checkmated. But the other reason you would try to trade pieces is that with less space, that gives you more squares to maneuver on, whereas right now it looks like everybody's wrestling their cousin for the last piece of pie, right? So black tries to play queen h4, but again, Leela, she understands what she's doing here. She plays queen f3. High-level chess understanding, even if you don't see the win of the attack, you have to know what type of pieces will help you in that attack and make sure that those stay on the board, even if you don't see the concrete plan yet. So after queen f3, we saw queen e7. Highlighted, it should be pretty obvious now who's in the driver's seat if it hasn't been already. We see some maneuverings. I wouldn't call it full computer tickle where they're just sort of shuffling, but it was a little bit of poking and prodding by Leela here to try to make sure that she got the pieces right where she wanted to be before ultimately playing kind of the obvious follow through, the kind of thing you can really only do when you have a really big space advantage with your opponent unable to change the structure or open the center, and that's just gain more space. G4, right? Why not? G4 exclam for those who follow me at my twitch.tv/Daniel Rensch channel, then you know the inside joke of the G4 emote. So G4. Now, Jokes aside, this is just clearly such a dominant position, and at this point, it's really hard to see how this game lasted as long as it did. I'm not going to say the move number yet; that's a little Tarantino for you, but we're still going to learn a lot about how Leela converted on this position, and to be frank, even some interesting things I noted in analyzing this game deeply for a while with Komodo, where maybe Leela didn't play the absolute best moves. After the move Queen H7. Knight A3 was played, the relocation of the knight to a square that more effectively attacks black's two weak pawns makes sense. Queen to G6, rook to G2, Queen H7, knight to C4, and now we see the move knight to B6. Now, the one thing I didn't highlight, and this is not to poke it at Leela, but instead of this maneuver that ultimately leads to a very safe approach, probably for those more aggressive at heart, you might want to take a look at what Komodo thinks about the position after Queen H7, if given a lot of time to think. Komodo doesn't think that white needed to remaneuver. The move E5 immediately takes advantage of something really kind of awkward in black's setup, only because the queen's on H7. That's that after D takes E5, Queen D5, even moves like Knight F6 fail to Rook takes E5. And suddenly we remember that checkmate is still greater than the queen, even in this day and age. So with that not being possible, moves like Rook takes E5 can be met by Queen takes E5, and you can really see just how dysfunctional black's setup is with the queen on H7, all kinds of back rank and E-file problems. And Komodo's perspective is that this was the more accurate, aggressive way to win. Note that I agree with Komodo, especially because moves like Queen G6, just trying to wiggle your way out, don't even work after things like F5. The queen has no choice but to go right back, and you might even see a queen sack on E8 to end this game in nice fashion. So, for whatever reason that is, I have a theory I'm going to propose later. Leela seems a little bit hesitant at times to part with material for compensation. That said, those lines seem to be pretty straightforward, so perhaps she just has a different evaluation in her self-taught approach to the game, and that really likes to keep the structure as is until absolutely necessary to change it. And that might explain or justify why she took this maneuver. And justify why the next thing we're going to ask is, why didn't Leela play knight takes A5? The analysis I did shows again that after knight takes A5 and still following up with E5, using the pin, white should be clearly better. You can check this out on your own time with the latest version of Stockfish or Komodo, whatever you want. But the pin on the E-pawn and the big center ensuing for white should have been clearly enough for Leela to be better as well. But even though she took on B6, again to remind you what we just saw, took on B6 instead of winning the A-pawn, after seeing the next few moves, it's hard to argue that one approach is necessarily better than the other, because after H4, Rook C7, G5, H5, and F5, tell me you're not getting a little bit excited. Keep it PG, even if you're all alone in your office, but you know what I'm saying. This is just amazing for white, right? I mean, you really can't argue with the pressure or that black is so cramped. Not to mention you have a Frankenstein pawn over here on B6 with a bishop that's not doing anything. So we've learned something about the patience and the disciplined approach white has taken with this pawn structure from the outset. But it's still instructive to note that likely there was at least one moment where a temporary pawn sack could have led to even more pressure. That's going to come back later in this video. After G6, Queen to H3, Rook over to F6. Leela took immediately on G6, highlighted pretty obviously by the fact that Queen takes would just lose to Rook takes F6. Komodo suggests that being a little more patient, oh wise lizard, maybe you're right, followed by similar ideas might have been better, but we're going to follow through with this plan because it's not really relevant at this point to be arguing between apples and oranges. What is relevant is that after the move C4, we see maybe why Leela can justify the approach she did. The fact that this king has been opened a little bit makes C4 such a dynamite move. The reason for that is it breaks the thought I have that it might allow black to change the structure. When you're better, you don't want to allow that, but for good reason. If black was to ever take here, you're literally bringing the bishop to the most dangerous diagonal on the board. Things like queen over to F3 and rook executions are probably going to be enough for white to win. And if that's the case, meaning if black can't en passant, then you have to love C4, because playing C4 is along the principles of what I was saying, actually, in that it completely prevents black, once again, from ever changing the structure. Keeping your opponent down, right? The patience that white has here to make sure that black has no positional breakthroughs, instructive stuff. After queen to g7, bishop to f4, we see for the first time on queen f1, king g8, and then bishop g3, followed by bishop h2, that we're going to have a little bit of computer shuffling, as I like to call it, or tickle, depending on what you're into. Again, I analyzed this and gave a little more of a detailed, thorough opinion at the blog that is linked here in the notes, wherever you're watching this video. But I think that one of the things we're going to take away from this is that computers are hesitant to give up a space advantage. It's one of the things they value over a lot of things, right? And so given the time control and horizon effect, meaning they're not really forcing themselves to look as deeply as they might normally given the evaluation they're currently holding, giving themselves plus 2.5, right? Because they love space. They're not as ready to consider positional sacrifices like human beings are. And that's something that we're going to see is really highlighted over the next 30 moves where I'm hardly going to say anything, you're welcome, and just kind of skip forward. Because it really shows that even though there's a very clear plan here for white, and that is to put the queen on this diagonal, I'll just do it here instead of letting Leela lead the show. Put the queen on this diagonal, punch the e5 pawn through, put the queen on e4, where g6 becomes the most obvious target, and combine that with the pressure along the 6th rank, and this game is essentially going to play itself. There's almost nothing that changes about this structure from now until that move finally being played in about 30 moves, which really highlights again what I'm saying, that it is most of the time all of us on our knees worshiping the new chess gods built of artificial intelligence, Silicon Valley chess gods. But it does show that there are some things grandmasters, strong chess players can quickly recognize about a position that the computers just refuse to go for until they absolutely have to, right? Like the contempt factor, the fact that they want to avoid the draw. So let's take a look and see exactly the real life version of everything I just described, and you're going to see that it's really a game of tickle that doesn't really have anything going for Leela, and until she plays, I believe the move was probably around 74, 75, until she starts to get the king out of the queen side. Yeah, with this move, king f1. Here she recognizes, I think, the plan for the first time, based on having analyzed this and see how the computers evaluate. Because for whatever reason, for better or worse, white made the decision that when this e5 breakthrough came, she didn't want the king anywhere over here on the king side, where maybe it could be open. There are certainly some possible diagonal shots for the queen, whatever. I don't think you could really make that big of an argument that e5 is any better with the king where it ultimately landed over here on d2 or d1. But it is something that that does show for the first time, at least, she was no longer continuing to shuffle, right? That there was some sort of plan in mind. And ultimately, once that king arrived on d1, she did make the breakthrough. And forgive me for showing you all these moves, but hey, you want to appreciate the real thing just like me, right? So after king d1, queen g2, rook e7, we're in pretty much the exact same position where I highlighted e5 needed to be played, other than the fact that the king is here instead of g1, and Leela finally busts open the door with the move e5. Perhaps the fact that I said she's a little materialistic was more than just a jest earlier in this video. Willing to part with the pawn doesn't seem like there was any reason to wait as long as she did. Again, other than the fact that I guess black wasn't going anywhere for a while. Maybe she was having a Snickers. Queen e4, king h7. Of course, you see g6 is falling. And the next few moves really are just flawless execution of gobbling up a second pawn. We're going to see the pieces maneuver for white to get the other rook into the 6th rank. This last few moves were not just useless shuffling. A very nice recognition that the bishop is no longer most useful on h2 hitting e5, but now that the c5 pawn and b6 pawns are gone, the bishop was most useful coming around here to e1, where the rook and bishop can gang up. So again, just really, really nice stuff there from Leela to relocate that. That forces rook a6. And now with a couple more tempi moves, we see black put in a sort of zugzwang here because of the threat of queen to b7. He finally does surrender the 6th rank, and here comes the other tower of power. Now, this is where, believe it or not, I think we've learned a lot, but this is where the video gets really interesting. And those of you who may have come in because of our kind of fun and sexy thumbnail, or wonder exactly what it means to troll somebody, you're about to find out. And this is what really had me on the edge of my seat, and ultimately what actually inspired me to do this video is what we're going to see from here. After, excuse me, after the move queen to g8, we see the rook come to c6, threats on g6, force rook to g7. This game seems momentarily over, right? The move queen e2 was played is brilliant. Pause your video if you want to try to solve white's threat of a mate in 2. I gave you a second. Too late. The move is queen takes h5, followed by rook h6 mate, right? So with that threat in mind, black has to give up the g6 pawn. King c2 is really just, I guess, a Leela waiting move, because the next move coming is really unstoppable. Could have been played right away. We see the transition, and with it, again, we see white probably in a pretty crushing position. Here Leela played queen e4, and you can check out the blog at Chess.com, again, on the show notes to see my thoughts about how queen f3 was more accurate. And again, it's further proof in my theory that maybe Leela's self-taught approach is still leaning a little bit too much toward materialism. And the reason for that, you're going to see, is if you look at the analysis, you'll see that queen f3, I think, was almost in the realms of announcing mate. But queen e4 followed by queen to c6, I think missed the defensive shot e4 here, exclaimed by Chiron, which, okay, gives up material, which is why Leela may not have considered it as the best defensive resource for her opponent, right? Not thinking that way. It does open up the e5 square and added a few more moves before she was winning. Everything I just said could be total hogwash in the sense that maybe she knew exactly what she was doing and went in for this for the exact reason that she wasn't done having her fun or having her way. Did I just imply true human emotion to a computer? Don't believe me? Keep watching the next few moves. This game is simply over, and if you turn on Komodo, Stockfish, or anything else, the computer starts announcing things like mate in 30 on moves like b6, a5. These are the obvious things to do when you're up a queen and a whole bunch of pawns for 2 rooks, right? No reason to change anything significant about this structure. Apparently, Leela disagreed. Queen f6 and the move that may have changed the game forever, showing computers apparently like to torture their opponents, showing, am I really applying human emotion to an AI? I think I am. Queen takes e7. What are you doing, right? Like, seriously, there was no reason to do this. And again, check it out. The wins are just obvious. But no, white wanted to take here and prove that these 4 pawns would be better than the rook. Guess what? It gets worse. Leela is not done. After chess here, she repeats moves. There's no reason to repeat moves. Literally, this move and this move are announcing mates in 19. Check it out if you don't believe me. King b6, rook e6, she's just playing tickle. But rather than advance the a-pawn, she plays c5. Takes the evaluation from like plus 20 or announcing mates back to like plus 10 if you look over the computer. So she's just literally having fun. And this isn't some sort of approach by her that's different. Again, we see d4 being played unnecessarily, not the most accurate way to win in an undeniable sense. And after a few more moves, we reach the final sort of climax, if you will, where there's undeniably no way that Leela's creators or whoever they programmed her to be self-taught and apparently torture her food before she eats it happens right here, when after the last series of checks, she sacrifices her queen again, completely unnecessary, and then goes on to sacrifice every pawn in under promotion fashion. I mean, you could see the smile on my face. I was watching this game, and like everybody else at the Chess.com computer, I was like, what? Like, this is not what computers do to win. And okay, here black didn't take it. Chiron, maybe after the move king g6, was hopeful that Leela would actually undermine her advantage almost completely by getting a bishop here, right? That might be a fun way to see a computer versus computer knight and bishop mate. But apparently she finally came to her senses and decided to get a queen. Maybe she doesn't know how to do the knight and bishop mate, and if so, she should watch my video lecture on YouTube about how to checkmate with the knight and bishop. But she didn't. She instead finishes off the job, finally, in the most accurate fashion. And we have, maybe, the first time one chess engine has trolled another, and done so in fashion and in style, I guess. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. I appreciate you taking the time to watch it. As I said, you can go to chess.com and check out the blog. You can also go over to chess.com/computerchess or /CCCC, where you can view the Computer Chess Championship going 24/7 around the clock. You can also go to twitch.tv/computerchess. All of those links are in the show notes if you want to check out the live broadcast of these games. If you want to read my blog, like I said, head over to chess.com. You can also join the official CCCC fan club. A lot of C's there, you know, but apparently we're into that sort of thing. We'll rethink some of that branding maybe down the road, but none of that matters. What matters is we just saw an awesome game, had a lot of fun, and I appreciate you watching and subscribing to our YouTube channel. Peace out.